I very much enjoy teaching, for example, poetry and the analysis of poetry to young children. They all get very excited about the rhythm. Ooh, is this an iambic pentameter, or is this a trochee or a spondee, or no, it's a dactyl. Yes, indeed it is.
Professor, I've just been listening to your talk about universities and also the earlier terminology and so forth, which you focus completely and entirely on the Latin terminology. But I thought that it would be worth mentioning, if I can get your attention or not. Actually, I might even send it through your website rather than tagging you, because you can't always see the mentions tab unless you're using a mobile phone. So, yeah, I mean, I recommend that you watch those 4 or 5 new Howard Crowhurst videos on his channel about Stonehenge and all the mathematics. They're absolutely amazing. And the fact they had all these, like, you know, the megalithic yard and all these sticks that they would carry around because they had the ancient measurements. But what I found interesting was the Alfred jewel and the pointer on it. The pointer on the Alfred jewel, I think, what is meant to be found somewhere down the southwest. I don't know whether the Alfred jewel is legitimate or whether it's forged or not. Some suggest that it's got a snake head. It looks like a frog. It almost looks like one of those frogs from South America, those buffetine toads. But I don't know whether they went over there and found out about them after they'd seen them using them, and then came back and created that, and then someone made it to make out that we knew about it earlier before we went over there or not. That was one of my hypotheses. But whether it was like a snake head, because they used to have grass snakes over here, and then remember the Hembury Hill Fort is like a huge dragon, which I still believe that is something to do with Arthur Pendragon, and it's almost like it's got its wings spread across the kind of where Exeter is, and I still think the Welsh flag's based on that. But getting back to the pointer, the Alfred jewel pointer, so this very, very mysterious period, you know, the 700, 800, 900, you know, maybe even up till 1100, you know, just till after, leading up to, or even after the conquest. This, in fact, I think it was when the Vikings were coming over and attacking, actually. You know, the period when they actually were meant to wear the fashion and style of the period was the actual wizard hats and strange. The very early church, you know, we're talking, you know, St. Patrick and in and around before and after that period. The very early Christianity, when it's mixing with what's left of the Celts, and when it comes over here, they've got these. I don't know whether they actually had them in. You could actually check this whether they had them in Rome or not, but they're meant to be attributed to these special pointers that they made and sent out to the bishops. You know, Alfred had them made and sent them out, and there's meant to be only so many of them that they found. They found one apparently in Rotherham or somewhere, or Sheffield, and it doesn't look very elaborate, really. It looks quite shabby. The Alfred jewel's meant to be the main elaborate one, but it had a length. It had like a length of a pointer on it, and they said that they used to, when they were learning to read the texts of the Bible, they'd have the book open, you know, like the Book of Kells. They'd have the book open, and it would be big, quite large books, and then they would be sat, the students, learning the texts, learning the verses, and he would follow it with the pointer for each word, and he would be pointing out each word of the verse with the pointer, and it's like a single pointer. It's not like a compass when you have 2 pointers. On a compass, you have 2 pointers on the compass because you have point A and point B, which you can draw perfect circles with the compass. But the single pointer Like the wand, it's where you get the, the wand, the wizards, the whole emblems for the wizards and the wand are really from the early church and so forth. It's like the unicorn's horn, which is singular. Universe, a singular verse, which means that it's a line of text which has usually a singular meaning. Now, what I find interesting is that there are some BBC programmes which show a lot of the early Latin that was learned. The Celtic people were being very creative with it. Apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently they were being more creative than the Romans were with it. And the Greeks, apparently, they were doing, there was a lot of... I don't know whether the gravestones or monuments or stone carvings which had very early Latin in, but it was so artistically and poetically laid out that you could read various different things in it backwards and forwards through the letters, basically. So it had alternate meanings. I wouldn't go as far as to say as codified, these... coded. Well, coding's coded. It wasn't coded, so it could be translated if you had the key for the code. But at least it was artistic, creative, had wordplay. When you read it backwards or sideways and so forth. And apparently, it was in England where they played around with the language. So the thing with Stonehenge, therefore, and the whole Howard Crowhurst and the Druids or even the prehistoric people going back even further, because this is like 2,500 years BC or whatever. I mean, what happened in those entire 2,000 years? We've had 2,000 years since Christ. So 2,500 years before even we get into the Celts and the Romans. I mean, what characters did we have around then with all these mathematical measurements and circuits around Britain where all these places line up over hundreds and thousands of miles? And then we've got these, the Temple of Apollo, Stonehenge, apparently the Sun Temple, which is in a perfect place with the longitude and latitude for this astral event. And then we've got all these recumbent circles in Scotland, which have these moon phases and so forth, all for a particular time of year, observable in that particular place, and they all line up over long distances to form perfect rectangular right-angled shapes and so forth, like with between here and Stonehenge and Newgrange. I believe that the hunter-gatherers who explored and found all the different foods and got to know what all the different foods did, particularly when they were in diets of different foods over certain seasonal periods. And they learned to travel by the stars because, they were out a lot. And as you're traveling, you learn those places are good for viewing certain things. So, and I believe that's how actually the Druid tradition developed and evolved, and why and I don't think that they stayed in one place at all. I think that my strong belief is that this 20-year period of study for what the Druids had, my strong belief is that it was actually as you learned astronomy and the stars and the mathematics, and you kind of learned it. You went to they had celebrations at these different places for these astral events, and they would travel to them. So you're learning to use the astronomy and travel as you go around these circuits. But the thing is, there was meant to be those three levels. There were meant to be the bards in poetry and the naturalists learning biology and about plants and herbs and basically the doctorate. And then you had the judges who made decisions and judge-making. I don't know whether they specialised or not, but I think that they kind of, graduated through the rank. A holistic... They said that every complete, finished, trained druid was a embodiment of all their knowledge. So they knew everything. They knew all of the knowledge of the order. They were a complete, fully educated person in all the subjects. And that's what I think of the university. It's the universe, the whole thing. And that's why you get 360 degrees, your circle, you know, and not just one degree. Now you have a degree, you're a specialist in this subject or that subject. Whereas the Druids were the totality of the knowledge, each one of them. This is what I think. I think when they were young, they started out learning how they learned all the songs was by verbal poems and songs. So they learned all of the knowledge, not from reading books, but learning the songs, and then they can make up their own songs as too. And then as they had learned everything that they'd been taught about it, then they went out and practiced and went into learning about the nature and the mathematics. But they're travelling round all the time. You know, I believe that they signed up and started possibly Avebury and Stonehenge, that area. It was like a reception. And then you go off and start going around, and you go around the circuits, and then you're actually studying at places. Now, there's an alternative conflicting theory to that before, you know, all the barrows were mowed down by the farmers, and before, you know, the forests were cleared, and before, you know, there were many more sites, many barrows and sites all over us, because they had them everywhere. That's what they were saying. So, you know, why would you need to travel around? Because still there's a certain area of the country they had. It's like, Worthing, you know, Sisbury Ring. It's specialists for flint, and they lived on there and had flint, you know, and then, you know, although there were other places in the country that were good for it as well, but then you've got the potteries and different areas, just like you had different specialist areas for materials, gold and so forth, and you had a hill fort that specialised in flint, people lived there. You've got these different areas that was specialising for different types of observations. But why have one, you know, if there were quite a few people training and learning to be the Druids, then, you know, we have one stone circle up in Aberdeenshire. There were apparently about 150 of those recumbent stone circles. There's only one Stonehenge, though. But then you've got, you know, Newgrange in Ireland and sites in Isle of Man and so forth. Many of those long barrows were all different and unique and one-offs, and I believe some of those were specialised, but, you know, there's arguments whether they're for burials or not. But West Kennet, now it has been known that it was open and in use for a long time. I still think that was part of the inner journey in the imagination and spiritual side of it, learning about the inner journeys and the illuminations, the iconography, the speaking with your intelligence, reflections, and psyche, learning the psychological side of it. We've got all those kind of places all around Scotland as well, but they're mainly sort of around the coast. The ironic thing is that in the centre of the island around us, there's hardly anything, or at least nothing left of anything that there was. Whatever there was, you know, if they completely demolished all traces of it, except these two very, very large sites, which do have a formation and symbology and meaning, and they're actually quite well located for the island, you know. So this whole the university, the whole thing. Howard Crowhurst is saying, you know, that the calculations are absolutely spot on with the size of the planet, measuring the planet and the increments of longitude and latitude. If you watch it, also with other sites, you know, and there is another hypothesis or theory that they do this training, and then once you've completed it, then you take the knowledge away with you, and then you go out into Europe or into the world, and you are teaching other people. So there's this theory that, you know, you learn, they learn to be the Druid, and then you're going round, learning all the songs, learning all the observations, learning all the astronomy and everything else, and then they have judges. You go around and do judgments. You see, the Druids didn't pay taxes, but the taxes were the judge when the judges were all private judges. I don't think that the villagers had a permanent judge. I think that they had these circuits going round, and then just whoever was coming through at the time, which is where you get the judge circuits from that they've currently got now, because there's a strong evidence for this in what's left of the old ancient. We've got records of what the judicial system was in Ireland, and to me that solves the whole problem and fits perfectly with the Howard Crowhurst evidence. You had artisans and people in the village, very skilled people, like who made the talks and all the metalwork and so forth, and all of the free people in the area voted on who was going to be on the council, or was going to be the king, and then when they were elected, then they made the laws up, what the laws were going to be, but they didn't make the judgments. The Druids came round and made the judgments. But then, it didn't really matter if all these different, villages all over the place are making different laws up, but if the Druids, you can have varying laws, but you could kind of twist it a little bit with the Druids' opinion. But I still think that you see all these separate villages and clans, but the Druids were one order. So that's still like one united thing, rather than like separate degrees. Is almost like separate villages and clans and whatever with different names. But really the Druid orders the whole island, the whole circuit and all the sites, which they definitely did know and measure, and then all the knowledge and so forth. And then they only ever seem to talk about wars and fighting. They never talk about the trade routes, the potteries, the flints, the copper axes, all these things which required travellers, tradesmen. They're coming over with alcohol from the Mediterranean. Ampules even before the Romans invaded. So when we go fast forward past all that, to this very early period after, the Romans didn't want Christianity or the Druid order, and they didn't like the Druids because the whole Celtic culture had sacked Rome anyway earlier on. So in a way, the invasion was a bit of a revenge mission. But then this whole thing that Druids could stop villagers fighting and use diplomatic immunity and go and make judgments between armies in negotiations. That would have been a bit of a powerful thing for the Romans if, really when the Druids couldn't stop that would have been a big showpiece against all these Celts that, the Druids, it would be a big showpiece that the Druids had no power at all once that Roman army came over and was unstoppable, because they wouldn't be able to negotiate anything. In fact, they went and killed them all and wiped them out and then destroyed all the sites. I wouldn't have been surprised if they're responsible for pulling Stonehenge to pieces, to be honest, because that was a clear mission they had to destroy all the ancient sites and so forth. And to be honest, all the Greeks and Romans took all the credit for all the mathematics anyway. But, going back to the, 800, 900 period or whatever, with those unique, the single pointers, not the compass. The thing with the compass is when the two-pronged compass is how you draw the circle, a perfect circle, when you've got two of them. What I find interesting is the language of the Druids. There's a language in meaning and symbology where you can draw multiple meanings and multiple knowledge from pictures. Like you've got your hieroglyphics and so forth. Once you start leaving symbolic language, song, rhyme, poetry, meaning, and so forth behind, and then you get onto this whole Latin business of the letters, you can have alternate meanings in writing and letters if you want to, mix words up or write backwards or so forth. Or you can have some multiple meaning of words, but it's a lot more. It's a lot less diverse unless you start going into numbers and coding and so forth, hidden messages. It's a lot less creative, unless you go, take every third or fourth letter in every second or third word, to make up a new word, or, if you read it backwards or whatever. Words could have, 2 or 3 or 4 meanings, but usually when you're reading the verse and the line of, like, for example, the Bible, there aren't too many very, very creative meanings in the Bible, that's for sure. In fact, to be honest, I think that, I think people have drawn a lot more mystique and double meaning out of Beatles songs and Pink Floyd than they have out of the Bible, particularly the parodies and the stories like, Rachel and so forth. Nobody, if there's any meanings to be had out of that, they're not that diverse meanings. They're pretty straightforward. Nobody kind of like says that, Ringo was leaving any secret messages in there, that's for sure. So, I'm pretty sure that it was quite restrictive. And this universe, the singular verse, it's almost like, moving from a language of iconography, symbolic interpretation and meaning, and then going on to this singular line that they're allowed to read with this stick, this uni-stick, this unicorn pointy stick, and so forth, which is... I think that has got a lot to do with the university. But then again, this is the thing. If you just stick with the Latin interpretation of the origin of the words or whatever, then it is a uni. It's singular. You're not going into multiple or dual or, going from the single pointing stick to the compass where you can draw the whole circle, the whole thing. So... But it's true that, these Oxford and so forth started with the monasteries, and so really the university did start, from the religion and the monasteries and the education which they had passed on, or whatever was retained and not destroyed. I think a lot of it was destroyed, you see, through the Roman conquest, and a lot of it lost, particularly when they had to flee over to Ireland and Scotland. And they lost the judicial system because they used the Roman judicial system. And then after that, we get the Anglo-Saxon and then the Viking one. But it's lucky there was still some of it left in Ireland. I think the Irish legal system really, really explains how the old Celtic villages worked, really, and how they work socially with the laws and so forth. If you fit that with Howard Crowell's plan of travelling around the whole island and measuring everything up, fitting in with, doing a bit of judgments on your way as you're passing through village. Oh, look, there's the Druids are coming through. Let's grab one of them to make a judgment, And obviously, if you got them circulating and going around circuits all the time, supposedly then you'd never have someone who was biased all the time, and then be lucky you don't get a bad judge, and you take your chances, maybe not be bad in the first place, don't risk it in the first place, just behave. Because if you misbehave, you never know if you get whether you get a nice Druid coming through or not. It's possible that they had permanent residents or that they had permanent ones in the villages, but I tend to think that, or at least at some period, from all these different observation points and so forth, unless they had like the students were travelling around or whatever, I think there was definitely some sort of kind of a culture based on a lot of moving around. And it wasn't this, people stuck in the villages not knowing anything, because they were all going, what's the news? They're always saying that the Celts are going, what's the news? What news have you for us? Well, who would be coming around with the news anyway? Not just people who are delivering flint from Worthing or whatever, or bringing the pottery through or whatever, but also the Druids coming through and the bards and so forth on their rounds, and that maybe that when they were singing the songs, passing the news. In fact, that might want to be the first job when they were learning the songs at the bard level, the bard, besides learning knowledge, passing the news, delivering the news, from the coast and so forth as they're going round. In fact, that would be a good way to keep all your villagers informed of what was going on if you had your bards going round, because then you've got a constant circle of news going around the island as well, which would that would be practical and work. So that's my bit on the university. I'll stick it in the website field.